Hello and welcome to the Consumer Advice Show. I'm Jane Constantinis. Now, with the economy not in the best shape, most of us are increasingly reluctant to buy goods and services unless we really need them. And it's not just about when we buy, but who we buy from. When it comes to providers of essentials like banking, utilities and insurance, it seems many of us are beginning to vote with our feet and look for better deals as well as more ethical providers. Well, joining me to discuss this is social commentator Mal Fletcher and from Benenden Healthcare Society, Mark Bell. Gentlemen, welcome. Thank you for coming in to talk to me. And of course, we're live, so if you've got a question for either of our guests, then type it in the box on your screen and send it to us with your name, of course, and we'll get through as many as we can during the course of the show. So, Mark, you've done some research which has thrown up this really interesting ethical phenomenon. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, the research, we originally commissioned the research because we'd noticed that since the credit crunch had started, we'd had a 25% growth in membership. And we were sort of noticing increased phone calls into our call centre and a lot of interest in the mutual idea. So we commissioned some national research to try to understand whether it was actually a trend in people shifting behaviour. And the findings are very revealing, as I'm sure we'll talk about.
What is going on, Mal? Because I confess that I would have expected the opposite. I would have expected in times of a financial crisis that people are putting their ethics to one side actually and thinking, I just need the cheapest because I haven't got the cash. What's going on?
Well, actually the opposite is true, Jane, because when material security goes down in the community, moral altruism tends to rise. Last year, Red Nose Day raised a record amount of money in the midst of the worst recession we've had in 30 years. Why? Because people want to be more than consumers, they want to be activists. So they're trying to buy into companies now that will give them the opportunity to change something, whether it's on a local scale or a global scale. I don't just want my needs met, they're saying. I want to contribute to social capital, to invest in something bigger than the company itself.
And is this trend then likely to continue? Once people have voted with their feet, as we're saying, will they continue to purchase in that way?
Well, I think they will. I think, and it's partly to do with the whole globalism drive that we're seeing worldwide. You know, as globalism increases, so does tribalism. People are hungry to find others who think like they do, have their values and ideals. So they're not just looking for the best product now. They're looking for a company that shares their values and with whom they can build a relationship. They're looking for trust and mutual respect and a win-win situation. We don't any longer, Jane, want that old customer-supplier relationship. We want more of a friendship. We want to know in the tough times that you've got a friend, not just a bank manager.
So that word tribalism is interesting, isn't it? Because it can be quite loaded, it can be very negative. But if we talk about belonging, is that something that a company, a mutual offers then? In fact, we've had a question in, let's get down to the basics straight away, because Anthony has said, what exactly does it mean when a business is a cooperative or a mutual? What is the difference?
Okay. It's a very good question. I mean, the simple way of explaining it is that a typical PLC would have shareholders, and the organisation is run primarily for the benefit of the shareholders to generate a return on the capital. A mutual organisation, needs to operate to financial standards, but is more owned by the membership, and it's run for the benefit of the membership. And in the particular example of Benenden Healthcare, for example, we're a not-for-profit mutual, so we are not driven by making profits. We're driven by supplying the service to our members. So I guess there's an ethical difference which positions a mutual organisation in different territory to a PLC.
Do you think, Mal, that this is something to do with the enormous loss of trust that we've all witnessed and very many people have experienced with the big financial institutions in the last year?
Yes, well, we have to remember that recession was partly brought about by short-term thinking and too much reliance on credit in our spending habits. So people now are reacting to that. They're saying, I don't just want short-term convenience now, I want long-term value. And as I said, I want companies that will work with me to achieve something beyond the interests of the company itself. I think it's a trend that's growing. I think that altruism's been a streak through our society for many years, but it's only in recession that it really comes to the fore.
I confess, Mark, that a bit like buying organic food, I think, I have a perception, and I think others do too, that in order to be more ethical, you've got to pay more. Is that actually the case?
It may well be in some cases. I mean, you can never say never about everything, but certainly the whole basis of the business model of a mutual organisation is that you're trying to provide services at a lower cost that everybody can afford. And the idea is that you have a belief about helping each other. So generally speaking, certainly in healthcare, which is what I'm here to talk about, people create a pool of income. So they're paying a fee every month, and that income helps people whether in times of need. So actually that enables the price that is charged to each individual member to be lower than if they were supporting dividends for shareholders or other operating costs. So it's not always true to say that you have to pay extra for ethical, and in many industries it actually brings the price down to the consumer. And Benetton Healthcare is an example of that.
That's interesting, because I just assumed that I'd be paying a premium for buying green, if you like. And I think perhaps a lot of this gets all confused with green issues and buying green fuel and utility providers and so on. Yeah. It's a bit difficult to separate the issues out, isn't it?
It is a bit difficult, but I think that the concept is getting more widely understood. I mean, there are 23 million people in the UK that now belong to mutual organisations such as our own, and we have 1 million of those people. And if you lined all those people up, they stretch from London to Sydney, so that's an awful lot of people. And as I said, we are seeing an increase in people wanting to join us, and I think lots of big successful companies like the Cooperative Group, there's very much a renaissance in this type of business model.
Howard Mitchell has asked a question that Mal, perhaps you'd like to tackle. Does this desire for more ethical goods and services come from the government's desire to get us more environmentally friendly? Whenever have we done what the government has expected us to do?
Exactly. Well, that would be my first response. I think we tend to react the opposite way to the government's guidance.
Well, like naughty children, aren't we?
Exactly. If Gordon Brown says it, we'll do the opposite. But I do think the government's becoming aware of something that the community already knows, that we do have an ethical responsibility to our wider community, to society. In politics, they call it social capital, investing in the local community, which, of course, benefits everybody. But what's pleasing about the sort of companies that I think Mark's representing is that they're not so much attuned just to their shareholders. Because they're grassroots level oriented, they're able to take risks and innovations that big shareholder companies don't. They won't take the chance, but the chance might actually bring greater value to me as a customer or a client.
But it's not the kind of risk-taking that we've seen that has led to such disasters.
No, it's not risk-taking with somebody else's property on a big scale. It's risk-taking that the mutual group, as I understand it, agrees to together corporately, whereas the banks, you didn't have that.
I think that's spot on. I think effectively, it's about community, and I think community is a key word, because you only have to look at the changes in behaviour, in consumer terms, that people using the internet more, going on MySpace, Facebook. These are about communities of people and the pooling of knowledge, and I think that that is reflected throughout the shift that we've noticed since the recession. Provided a bit of a shock, really. I think people were sort of stunned into think, actually, I'm going to be a little bit more careful about where I spend my money and who I spend it with. And I think no doubt that's benefited companies like Benetton Healthcare and other organisations. But I think in doing that and searching for information, I mean, in healthcare, over 10 million people every month are searching for terms connected with health, because health is obviously very important. And they've come across this mutual idea, and I think particularly younger people are starting to think, well, actually, I do have an ethos. I do want to be part of a community. I don't want just to be a cog in a large faceless organisation. So I think that is definitely moving and shifting consumer behaviour.
You've raised an interesting point there. Just going back to the research for a second, were there any patterns in terms of demographics or age or gender that came out of the research?
Yeah, one of the key trends was that the trust angle of it was more relevant for females, for women. We definitely saw a bias between the male and female split, and in many respects, that may reflect who controls the purse strings. I don't know, but certainly from 75, but 3/4 of the survey, from a female perspective, put the trust and the security element of whom they have their banking arrangements with, or whom they have their healthcare arrangements, right at the top of the agenda. And that was less than with the male demographic. And then there were other highlights. For example, in Manchester as a region, and in the northwest, they had the highest variance in terms of people that had considered changing their service provider. since the recession had started. So there was definitely some interesting statistics that came out of it.
And this is people who are changing provider, not
Yes.
people coming to you and companies like yours for the first time.
Indeed, it's people that are changing or thinking about changing their provider, and nationally that amounts to 14 million people. So whichever way you look at it, the data does show that it's a topic that people are actively thinking about now, and I think that needs to be taken notice of.
We're about halfway through, so I'll just say again, if you're inspired to ask a question to either of our guests, just type it in the box on your screen and send it to us with your name. Mal, this sounds to me like people are beginning to make their purchase decisions more based on emotion than hard data, if you like. Is that what's going on?
Well, it is a data-obsessed age. We get so much information. I think the estimate is that by the year 2014, the average American will receive 9,000 commercial emails every year. So we're living in an information overloaded age, and people don't need more data. They need people to help them make sense of the data. And that's where I think the shift is coming. People are saying, where are the companies who will help me make good choices as an individual, not as a demographic group, but as an individual? Where can I get that personal touch? And if I ring up with a complaint, am I going to be dealt with by someone that doesn't understand my context, that's either culturally or geographically 1,000 miles away?
Yeah.
Or will I get somebody who can really relate to me? Those are really important questions. They're not just emotional. I think they're quite wise questions to ask.
I must say, I'm extremely gratified to hear you talking about something good that's coming out of the recession, that we're becoming more ethically aware and kinder and more focused on. There's got to be some good come out of it, hasn't
Well, there's
there?
one other good thing, Jane, and that is that companies now are starting to address this old "it's not my job" syndrome. Where you can go with a complaint to 4 or 5 different departments in the same company and not feel you're getting any satisfaction from any of them, simply because the worker feels that he or she is just a small cog in the big machine instead of an important spoke in the wheel.
Yeah.
And I think that cultural shift in companies is a good result
Yes.
of recession.
Yes. So let's talk about how people can suss out whether a company is ethically sound if they're thinking about making the decision to change provider. How do you go about getting to the bottom of what the company's really about?
Okay. I think these days a lot of companies are very upfront if they have ethical principles, and because they recognise that consumers have a choice, and that increasingly, as we've just been discussing, people are making choices based on the way that a company's ethics are presented. So it's like we do in our own personal lives, look at all the information. So you can look at company reports, you can look on websites, and one of the things that we found in Benetton is that actual word of mouth, talking to your peer group, talking to your friends, is a very valuable way of cutting out a lot of the advertising speak. And as I said, you're represented in Benetton. We have 2,500 members have been with us since before the Second World War. And you think about advocates of a model of a mutual healthcare organisation, and those people represent it. So I think looking across all the usual information, but always reference it with a peer group to make sure that the information is accurate.
What would your take on that be?
Oh, I agree totally with that, and I think you can ask questions like, how is this company's record with customer relations? Again, what are they doing for the wider community? Is there an avenue here for me to be investing in something beyond the interests of this company? Questions like, are they shareholder driven or customer-conscious, customer-driven? Those are for me, aside from the logistical questions of return investment and interest rates, those are the big ones for me.
With my cynical hat on, of course, I'm going to say that a lot of companies pay lip service to this whole corporate social responsibility. They've got pages on their website about charitable donations and so on. A lot of that is spin, isn't it? How do you get through that?
I think it is. I think, but certainly the mutual. There is regulation involved, so there are certain, as a mutual friendly society, we are regulated under the annotated combined code, and we have to operate under certain principles, and we have to, our accounts are audited and they have to be published in the way that a PLC would operate. So there are, I hate to go back to the government, but there are things that are put in place to protect the consumer and to regulate the industry. So I think that, it's about a consumer being selective, and as I say, the credit crunch has made people reevaluate where they are spending their money, and as I say, referring to websites and annual reports and official documents are a true way of understanding the ethics of an organisation.
Okay. And it's gratifying to see that I'm not the only cynic around, because Blake Saker, I think, and Stephen Jeffries both sent in questions along similar lines. Actually, I suppose, saying that aren't PLCs going to be trying to jump on the bandwagon?
Well, I actually don't think they can get away with it as they could probably 15 years ago, largely because of social networking media. I mean, look at the post-Iran election situation. That was political. But the power of things like Twitter to generate news and get people into the conversation live, I don't think big companies will be able to hide anymore. I think the days of the tyranny are gone in that respect, and people now are talking a lot more, so there's a lot more opportunity for what you were talking about, the peer group reference.
Absolutely.
The buzz.
So just a tiny bit of practical kind of step-by-step advice for Sarah Beaumont. Wants to change her utility provider, bad experience, doesn't want to be part of a faceless corporation. Just tell her where she should begin to look for somebody who is more ethically sound. Yeah,
I think the first port of call would be to go online, and she can use any of numerous forums that can be accessed through search engines. And and the beauty of a search engine is you can just type in a simple question and you can get a list of companies where you can access that information. So in terms of service providers, I would start off on an aggregator website. That would be the first point of call. They could of course go to benenden.org if she's interested in a healthcare service provider, and so individual companies can provide information as well. But the first port of call and the simplest and quickest way would be through an internet forum.
Great. And Mal, I'm sorry that we haven't had time to dissect the cricket tragedy in more detail.
I'm not sorry at all. I'm actually delighted that we've run out of time to talk about the cricket.
Still licking your wounds, but never
still
mind.
hurts so bad.
Thank you for coming in despite being in mourning to talk to us. It's been really, really interesting. Thank you, and Mark, thank you as well. And if you'd like to find out more about Benenden or about mutuals and how they work and so on in more detail, then go onto their website, which is benenden.org.uk. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you've found it interesting and enjoyable, and we'll see you again soon. Bye bye.